History laid the foundation
that informs our conversation. Welcome to the classroom.
From the church to the streets, and even in the suites, and all around the world. I'm gonna keep it real in the classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom.
Good afternoon and hello, and again, welcome back to Fannie Lou's Classroom. We have kicked off season 5. Last week, we had Reverend Edwin Robinson with us, and we had a great conversation just around what we might think about how we might move forward and what's most important, the ways in which we can think about how we not just resist what's happening, but also how we look to build our own pathways and clear our own pathways as a way to not just survive, but to thrive, not just under the next 4 years, but what does it mean for us to think about a vision for flourishing regardless of who holds power in the White House. And so we're somewhat going to continue that conversation on today as we talk more about, for me at least today, we want to lean into what has happened these past 4 days. Like, we can't ignore what has happened and what's upon us and what's to come. We want to make sure we always keep that at the center, but I'm super excited to extend that conversation on this week with my brother, my friend, my co-author, I'm going to say my comrade in the struggle for justice, peace, love, and liberation, the Reverend Dr. Reginald Wiliams Jr. Let's welcome him to the classroom. He's no stranger to the classroom, but welcome back.
What's good, sis? How's everybody doing? Hey, everybody in the classroom. Good to be with you again. Glad to be back.
Someone, of course, it's been a minute since you've been here, so I'm going to go ahead and read your bio real quick so people can know who you be, because that's important, right? So Dr. Wiliams is the first of 3 children born to Reginald Sr. and the late attorney Marcelle H. Wiliams. He was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois, into a family which acknowledged and affirmed a spirituality that serves God by serving God's people, particularly in the cause of liberation. Dr. Wiliams' pride and joy is in the persons of his 2 daughters, Miss Nia Marcelle Wiliams and Laila Imani Wiliams. Did I say her name right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and they are beautiful and grown at this point. When I met them, they were little. And there you got a college age, in college. And the other, how old is your high schooler?
My oldest is 19. My youngest is 16.
Yeah. Dr. Wiliams graduated from Whitney Young Magnet High School and attended Florida A&M University cum laude, the University of Wisconsin Law School, and he is the same at Proctor Conference School of Theology at Virginia Union University, where he earned his Master's of Divinity and his Doctorate of Ministry. He served at Trinity United Church of Christ as the Associate Pastor of Justice Ministry, which is where I met Brother Reggie through Trinity from 2002 to 2008. And now he proudly is serving as the pastor of First Baptist Church in University Park, Illinois. He's the most recent, he recently authored Moving the Masses, Pillars of Prophetic Preaching, and he also co-authored To Serve This Present Age, Social Justice Ministry in the Back Church by your host, curator of Fannie Lou's Classroom, myself. And he and I co-authored that book. We are super proud of that accomplishment as well. Dr. Wiliams serves as the adjunct professor at McCormick Theological Seminary and Chicago Theological Seminary in the areas of preaching and social justice ministry, and as the Demon Scholar Practitioner for the Samuel Proctor Conference School of Theology at Virginia Union University. Dr. Wiliams is a visionary prophetic pastor and professor who seeks to lead and teach through the spiritually centered and culturally relevant practices that affirms authenticity and liberation for all of God's children. Okay, let's welcome him back again. I should have did that first. Give him another big old hand for all, not just, your academic, capabilities, but just the practice part, right? It's how do you marry the academy and the church and the streets, which is so important. And I think even now in this moment that we find ourselves in, I think it's absolutely going to take all of us in community, wherever we find ourselves, whether you're in the academy, whether you are, a practitioner, I just think it's going to take everybody bringing their brick. If we want to use Nehemiah kind of context, right? We all have a brick to bring as we talk about how we manage where we go from here, if we want to keep, talking about even from our King teaching, kind of keeping that through line that we try to establish about, looking at King as pastor, prophet, and community organizer and analyst, policy analyst, right? So how do we continue to marry all three and what we learn from that to keep us thinking about how we might continue that mission and ministry in the 21st century? And so I thought maybe one place we can start, even if you're not watching the news, if you hop on social media, you're going to see the headlines. I mean, the headlines are everywhere, what's happening within these first 4 days of Trump's administration, and we have 4 years to go. And so I thought maybe we can start by just leaning into some of those headlines have been. And then I think we can have and I want to also talk about some real ways people are interpreting what's going on, right? But I don't want to lean into too many of the negative. Then we can lean more into the positive. I'm trying to give too much energy to those who are, who are in favor of what's happening in our country, and that's, even people who look like us, right, who will continue to affirm the current president. So one of the first things I saw this morning when I woke up, and kind of some of what's happening in the news, et cetera. Was that, Trump has called for, we know he called for, right, by Wednesday at 5 p.m., all DEI hires need to be put on paid leave. Now, who determines who the DEI hires are, right? So just even in that coded, for me, coded language, we know what they mean by put all DEI hires on paid leave. So, in light of that, and then recently, right, the Justice Department was ordered to halt all civil rights litigation and not to file any new litigation. So now that is on hold, right? So federal workers are being put on paid leave, being told not to even pursue any current cases nor bring any new cases. And then a new warning, right, says this: the Trump administration on Wednesday threatened federal employees with adverse consequences if they fail to report on colleagues who defy orders or purge diversity, equity, inclusion efforts from their agencies. Tens of thousands of workers were put on notice that officials would not tolerate efforts to disguise these programs by using coded or imprecise language. So it's a doubling down, right? I told you to do this, and if you think about doing something to disguise it, there's going to be severe consequences. Right, it's the terror that's being unleashed, right, even on people who are working every day. So, that. And then I don't know if everyone saw the headline where Trump then pardoned the 2 officers that were convicted of killing and covering up the death of 20-year-old Karan Hilton Brown, right? So it's this idea, he already talked about immunity for police officers. He's now even going back and pardoning police officers who were convicted by a jury of their peers. And so that's just some of the stuff we saw, right? And then you have the Chase CEO who admitted, right, that these tariffs that will be placed on China and on Mexico, the 20% tariffs that he's talking about imposing, is going to get down to the consumer, where people are like, oh, yeah, he should do that because they need to pay for bringing their products in. Well, now you're going to pay the price for that. And the CEO of Chase is telling people, get over it if you can't afford it. A billionaire is telling folks who got to live every day to get over it when those prices are going to hit down to people who have to buy these, really staples every day that they need for their home. So those are just some of the things that we see circulating, like real. And later on, I want to get to an exchange that someone had on Facebook. One thing Dr. Greg Carr always says is what you say in your head belongs to you, but what you say in public space belongs to all of us. So I want to talk about this exchange that happens. I think it's so significant in how we're missing it, and how we have to see what we can do to do more education. How do we create this echo chamber that can really garner the attention that we see that the white, if you want to say the Christian nationalists may get in terms of what's the dominant theme as relates to God in public, if you will. Like today we're talking about God talk, right? Resistance, rebellion, and revolution. So God talk is so important, how we understand that. So when we're hearing all of this swirling around and people kind of leaning into that this is about the Christian beliefs or Christian values, that is absolutely antithetical. That it's about, what, as Dr. Carruthers said this past week, it's like white dominion.
Mm-hmm.
all over the globe, the world over. And so I'll stop there because I want you to kind of give me your opening, and then we'll kind of just move in and out. But that's what I want the conversation to be around today, as we also use Sankofa, as a way of looking back, because we've been here. We all say we've been here before, but we have, because where they're taking us is really pre 1964.
Mm-hmm.
So we know we can talk about even before that, during enslavement, just the resistance that has happened. But through resistance, we also had liberation. So I still say we have power, and that's one thing Edwin kind of talked about last week, right? We still have power. It's how do we then build that power to not be so siloed, and so what I call doing mini kingdom building, by organization, church by church. But how do we do this as a collective? And I think we'll get to a little bit of that when we talk about some of what you want to talk about later on in the program as relates to what we do as a collective and how we might think about that. So I just kind of turn it over to you. You want to give us some opening comments, and we can just kind of move that way.
I don't know what else to say.
You have plenty.
After you didn't gave us the analysis and the action already. So I don't know what else to say. What I will say is this, and it's a seeming cliche, but it is so accurate. Elections have consequences, right? And we are seeing in the first 4 days the consequences of an election that happened is shaping the narrative for the next 4 years. Um, Certainly, these headlines are terrible, but not surprising.
Mm-hmm.
The headlines of which you spoke also reveal that this administration has no floor as to how low they will go to, totally plummet and levy plunder upon most of the people of this country, which is going to have worldwide effects. And so engaging in that analysis, I think, is important. I also think it's important, and I know you said we might talk about this later on, so we can get into some of the particulars, but I also think that it's important for our mental health and for our physical health that we not be one, surprised, but two, sucked in to each and every headline that comes up, being aware of it, but still being more resolved in to do our work, if that makes sense, right?
Right.
Because it is so easy to get, sucked into, he said this, he did this. We know he gonna say stuff. We know, and we also know that he's a mouthpiece, right? For Project 2025, for all of the puppet masters behind the scene that are manipulating his movements, and he's willing to be manipulated.
Right.
That's another. I don't know if I can say what I want to say on this podcast
You
because I
can.
got something else in mind. But
I mean,
but but yeah, those are some things I think that we need to be aware of, and also in being aware, decide that we're going to be well.
yes.
Right? Yes. I think that's extremely important. As you said, Reverend Danielle, this ain't the first time we've been here. And while that may not be the case for us physically, ancestrally, in our very bones, is the blood and the DNA of those who have had to fight and come up against administrations that were either as bad or worse, right? Although if we can imagine that, right? And so, this is a time, in my humble opinion, for us to engage in that, what you just said, community building, ancestral recollection, practices to expose and expand that for our experience. I think those are some of the things for us to do.
So, and I want to get to the ancestral practices and just looking at the ways in which our ancestors not only resisted, but created places for them to thrive. And those places that were created, hundreds of years ago are still there, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that. So I think it's also, and we won't stay here too long, but I do think I like the idea that we have to bring to bear to show where people are starting to find out how these executive orders are impacting a lot of people and not just those, quote unquote, that we know it was intended to impact the most.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I know, so you want to talk about the brother, our white brother in Texas, was this recently happened to him and his wife as an example of that.
And prior to Texas, I think a few days after the election, I believe in Ohio. In Ohio, there were some factory workers who, when Trump was, and in this town, if I'm not mistaken, they were pro-Trump. They were, excited about the election. And then 2 days later, because of the policies that were coming with Trump with regard to tariffs or whatever, either some of them or many of them were laid off, or had their salaries decreased significantly. And these were pro-Trump folk, right? So it's almost a case of be careful what you ask for, right? Because you can, perfect example. Dr. Claudette Copeland told a story at Hampton Ministers Conference a long time ago, said there's a rat trap in the barnyard. And with the rat trap in the barnyard, different animals got caught by the rat trap and said, well, you got caught by the rat trap. That don't bother me, right? You got caught by the rat trap. That don't bother me. You got caught by the rat trap. That doesn't bother me. Until they go and see that at the end of the day, the same rat trap almost killed just about each one of them. And I believe I'm not saying it as well as she would, but what it says is what affects one of us affects all of us.
Right.
All right. And if we don't ever get that kind of Ubuntu understanding of reality in our heads, we're going to be experiencing stuff like this forever. Right.
Right.
And so this is the lesson that, what grandma say, some people don't believe fat meat greasy.
Listen.
Yeah. It's
greasy.
greasy.
It's greasy. And, as people are saying, we done effing around. You finding out now. Right?
FAF5-4.
So, right, and we're finding out. But for me, I was just talking to someone the other day, and I said, I'm really trying. I think maybe me and Cheryl, we were saying the ways that we were, how you just have to not give energy to, right, the people. Particularly, I'm talking about Black folks now who are saying some of the stuff that they are saying in relation. Like, I saw a Black couple that said, well, it's good they're getting rid of DEI hires. Now we can just be hired on merit. I was hired on merit. Right. Then I saw another Black man posted and said, I don't know one Black man that was hired based on their color. It's just like, just the ignorance of it all. Right. And I'm saying that, this is what I was going to also wanted to point out. It was a Facebook thread, right? Because I've been hearing this too, right? So this is a brother who was responding to someone's Facebook posting. I think it was Dr. Tamara Lomax posted like the numbers, right? Who voted for Trump? Just kind of giving like the data. So brother responds, just saying that the pro-genocide candidate, referring to Kamala, as if Trump was not that. Like the policy has not shifted, right? And just saying, essentially saying that's why don't blame people who decide to hold their vote because they didn't want to vote for a pro-genocidal candidate. And I'm saying how ignorant that is, right? That's almost like people who only voted for Trump because of how they perceive his stance on abortion, right? These single issue focused type of folks who withhold, not understanding that is going to impact you in so many other ways. You're worried, and not just you're worried about, because it is, the genocide happening in Palestine is real, it's something we should be resisting against and something we'd be calling for an end to. But it's also the case, I don't see people talking about the ongoing genocide in the Congo, in the Sudan, in the many other places that genocide is taking place. We don't talk about the widespread femicide globally, right? So I'm saying that when people say that, that really troubles me. I detest to hear that, because you're looking at that one, but do you see all the unraveling that is happening because you withheld your vote?
Yeah.
Because of that, you're saying you have a pro-genocidal candidate. Are you saying Trump is not pro-genocidal?
Right.
Right. And so I'm saying that I just the ways in which that is, to me, seemingly continue to be said when people are saying, when we make comments about, you asked for this, you voted for him, or you withheld your vote, which means that was a vote. There's no such thing as a neutral vote, right? And so I don't want to give a lot of energy to that, but I think that's something we have to continue to show folks, that no, your non-vote really has real consequences. When you don't, and not making this case that she lost it because of that reason, right?
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes by Chancellor Wiliams is at the very beginning of his book, The Destruction of Black Civilization. And in the book, Dr. Wiliams tells real short story of a gentleman who was going through villages, talked to a sage, and asked the sage what happened to the people of Sumer. Those who know the people of Sumer, they were Black and brilliant. They created cuneiform writing systems at least 75 to 100 years before hieroglyphics. They created 6 and 10 number systems. They created the wheel. All of these different types of things. Sumerians. Whatever happened to these Sumerians? The old sage says they forgot their story, and so they died. Right. And so part of, in my humble opinion, some of the effects of the lack of votes with regard to the election come out of us forgetting some of our story.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes it ain't even forgetting. Sometimes we haven't learned it.
We don't know it, right?
Something has not been passed down. Right. And so when we talk a little bit later about, what it means to kind of move from here, part of that is going to have to be the intentional transmission of our story in ways that are healthy, in ways that are honest, transparent about the good and the bad of it.
Right.
With regard to, single, I mean, it's the forgetting of the story. It's also, I think, it's the challenge of what Du Bois called the double consciousness, right? It's the challenge of being quote unquote Black and American, right? Because we can't afford to be. So let me put it like this. I can probably challenge, because I don't believe in the genocide, I can challenge someone who has demonstrated through action to be able to sway them a little bit more than I can someone who is completely off the rails and will never engage. Does that make sense?
It does. Yes, absolutely.
So I can challenge Kamala. Okay, yeah, I don't agree with everything, but listen, once you get in, we're gonna talk about this genocide. We're gonna push on this and da 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 da. Right? Unfortunately, that's kind of a position that we're in, in the country. But letting the orange one back in is there is no openness or listening to anything, because exemplification of evil is in the administration.
I mean, in every aspect, right? Even down to I forgot his name, but he even tweeted out, right, this idea that, today I've been talking to cabinet members, and they are working hard to gather the list, and pink slips will start being handed out today. And then Elon Musk replies with all these fire emojis, right? Just this, to your point, there's no floor, right? There's no floor in the behavior that's being exemplified is evil, right?
And here, can I push just a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. Yes.
Here's what ticks me off too, right? You have folks. They did this during the Bush administration as well, and it's so. We just celebrated Dr. King's birthday, but it's so anti what King stood for and what King did, but they'll appropriate his name. You have folks who are just happy with proximity to power.
Yeah.
Folks that look like us with just proximity, getting invited to the White House, getting invited to da-da-da-da-da. And they gonna show you. I can't say what I want to say, but here's what they think about you, right? You won't be, here I can't say what I want to say, but here's what they think about you. You will never be. You're seen as a pawn to be played, right? You're seen as a puppet to be used. And then, they come back and bring that back to our communities as if we're supposed to, so yeah.
And the fact that you want to even have proximity, not to a different kind of power, right? This is a different kind of power. You're trying to be, and some of it, and you know what now, Dr. John Henry Clark, Barbara Clark would call it ego starvation.
Ego starvation. And on another level, he would call some of it that may even be on the quote unquote side, we're on showbiz liberation.
You see, it's so much into that. That's a whole nother show to unpack.
That's a whole nother show because it's so layered.
But it's very layered and it's very real.
Yeah. Right.
And just even in going back to the brother who was doing this exchange, hold that thought. I see you had a thought, hold it. Don't lose it. The one who had the exchange about people that withheld their vote are not to blame for what's happening because they refused to vote for this pro-genocidal candidate in Kamala Harris. Also in that same thread talks about his his station in life, which is as he identifies, working class, agendered, underemployed, a renter, and on Medicaid, and have a negative six-figure net worth. Now, make sense. The math definitely ain't mathing, right? But for you to withhold your vote because of that one issue where you're not talking about the other genocides that are happening, knowing at least, to your point, if she got in, you had somebody you could protest against.
Right. And they would listen.
But if you think you're going to do that now.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think, so I think these are some of the things. I don't know. People like this are they believe in that, right? He's he's standing 10 toes down on that position. And I'm thinking to myself, Medicaid, okay, we see what he's doing with healthcare, right? He effectively, took away Biden's executive order as it relates to, allowing people to negotiate with these pharmaceutical companies to manage the price on these life-saving. These not just drugs that people need just to feel good. These are life-saving drugs that people need. And most of them are going to be elderly. Most of those are going to be people who need to depend on, these social safety nets. People who work every day, have jobs, or may not be employed. There's a number of people who need these resources, not to mention the woke and weaponized budget that was presented before he was elected that talks about cutting SNAP benefits. I mean, the list goes on in healthcare, et cetera. So I think that it's just amazing. One of the things I said last week, and Brother Edwin kind of labeled it a different way when I said before we would always talk about, poor whites who would vote against their interests. So he said they vote against their flourishing and they voted for their interests of white supremacy. But I'm still saying, I think they're all interests. It's just which one overrides the other. Because I think they have a real interest in living every day, but this idea of now, maybe they see it as everybody's getting ahead and they can't get ahead, and it's because of DEI. Right? Yeah. It's because you let the black folk and other folk in. I can't get this and I can't get that, right?
Yeah.
So,
some folk have bought into what Eddie Glaude calls the lie. That some lives are more valuable than others.
Without
right?
question.
Eddie Glaude and James Baldwin. Some folk also voted to be white than human.
Right. That's
They
good.
would rather be white than human, right? And in that affirmation of whiteness or white supremacy, as you said, they are finding that some of those, negative pieces don't just affect others, but affect all. Um, and this may lead us somewhere else,
That's fine.
but Audre Lorde said you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tool. And I would expand that to say you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's thoughts or ways of being. And so I think that invites us into looking back at our authentic ways of being that again are housed in our DNA, and how do we move that to in the midst of this mess, in the midst of this um, abyss of anti-humanity, right?
Yes.
Uh, how do we move in those ways so that we are not drowned daily by we're aware, but not drowned by the policies that this guy's gonna, well, this administration, let me just say, he's a
Right.
figurehead. This administration is going to push. Yeah.
And I think that, so to your point, right, that we have to, some of us, right, to a degree, have to even throw off, and because we are, for the most part, our audience primarily, and certainly how we do this is from a very particular theological worldview, right? So for us here, it's the Black liberation and womanist theologies that inform, how we view the world, how we interpret public policy, how we interpret laws, and what we view as what it means to flourish. What does it mean to create beloved community in a very particular kind of way? And understanding kinging and nonviolence for what it is, and not this way of thinking that it's some type of weak way of being and operating, and having that as part of your that kind of undergirds how you do the work. It's how you're in community with one another, right? So talk to us a little bit about, because I want to now shift to, because we talked about kind of the headlines, and it's going to keep rolling out, right? And we're going to keep seeing people posting what I'm calling ignorant comments online. And some of it's not ignorant, some of it is flat out, like that is what they believe wholeheartedly, because they believe in whiteness over, to your point, humanity, right? That wins out. So let's talk a little bit about the theology, that our God talk matters. We talk about resisting, because that lends itself to how we resist, how we then move into revolutionary action that leads to liberation. And we can talk about it in Sankofa way too, right? We want to look back. So maybe we can let's start there. Maybe we start with what should our theologies be and how that informs our God talk, that we might look back and pick up that type of theology, that kind of God talk, or our ancestors' ways of knowing and understanding the divine in ways that they did not accept their captivity. Even post-reconstruction, like in every turn where we had to resist, we also were able to be liberated. It wasn't just resisting, but liberation, right? So talk to us about that.
So I think theology is a very foundational component of liberation struggle, right? I think that's one of the reasons, Howard Thurman might not have been on the front line, but people called him the pastor of the civil rights movement, because he was able to theologically ground those who were fighting, right? I think theologically, a theology of authenticity for me is what is key. And when I say authenticity, what I mean is a theology that affirms who we are, whose we are, and the practices found therein, right? So if we look back at, some of our ancestors, and we look back through sacred memory, while King had a nonviolent perspective, all of our ancestors were
Right.
nonviolent,
Right.
right? There were some who would shoot back. There were some who would. I mean, we celebrate the Amistad, we celebrate Senke, but Senke took care of business on that, and struck a blow for freedom, right? We
Right.
celebrate Nat Turner. Nat Turner struck a blow for freedom, right? We celebrate Harriet Tubman. Harriet had a Bible in one hand and 45 in the other, right? So there are these ways of, in my humble opinion, having to deconstruct how some of our theologies have been misappropriated based on white gaze. And when they've been misappropriated, they have been not distilled. They have been, in some senses, robbed of the strength of some of it by infusing that which was not authentic to us, right? So I think, and we go back to Bill Jones and God in the Ghetto. How you see God is going to determine how you see people. Is going to determine how you order your society. Take a step further. How you see God is going to order how you see people. Is going to order how you then arrange your communities, right? How you arrange and how you how you arrange and how you order the community of faith, the community of your household, the community you live in. I think there's a theological basis to all of that. That if a theological basis.
Uh-oh, did he freeze? Oh. Okay, we're going to try to get Brother Reggie back. He froze there for a moment. I'm not sure if he can hear us. Oh, there he goes.
Theologies work for us. That makes sense?
So Reggie, you went out for a hot moment. You said some good stuff. You froze. Yes, you froze. But I know you were saying some real good stuff. I can't just back up.
What's the last thing you heard me say?
I think the last thing you were saying about our theologies, I think we were talking about how we have to look back at our ancestors' theologies. You went through Nat Turner, you went through Harriet, and I think you said she had a 45 and another. I think that's the last thing.
That's the last thing you heard?
I think that's the last thing I heard.
So yeah, well, I think what I was just saying was we have to renew and restore our theologies that have been tampered with and then kind of internalized by us, right? Too often we have allowed white gaze to format what we could allow in our own spaces, churches. I mean, people do it all the time with your pastor, right? People try to say, "Oh, he's to this, to that." Did it with my pastor, say to this, to that. That's the basis of traditionally how we have expressed ourselves as people, right? So I think theology, and I think other thing I talked about with the theological piece is going back to Bill Jones, God in the Ghetto. How we see God will then dictate how we see people, which will then dictate how we order society, right? So looking at that from a communal standpoint, not just an institutional standpoint, how we see God is going to dictate how we see the people that are around us, which is then going to dictate how we organize our communities, our homes, our churches, our institutions, all of those different types of pieces. That if we are not engaging in your words, the work of resistance, which leads to liberation, then it's like, what are we doing? If we're not building power with a understanding theologically, I think you said something about this earlier, that we do have power, right? Yeah, they got a certain type of power, but we have power as well. And the quickest way for us to give away our power is to think we have none.
Right. Exactly.
So that theological, I think that theological foundational piece is extremely important. I'm blessed to work with a cohort of revolutionary theologians, practitioners, And one of the things, I mean, I don't know if I had a permission to call their names, but most of them,
Um,
Earl Fisher, Melvin Sampson,
yes.
Marcus Small,
Yes.
Bill Lamar,
Oh, right.
Irie Lynn Session,
Right.
and I know I'm missing somebody, so y'all forgive me if I ain't got your name. Marcus Small. Now I didn't get myself in trouble because I know I'm forgetting somebody.
But
Anthony
all the good
Clinton.
revolutionary
But
folk. Right.
but
Right.
we kind of came up with this definition of kind of proclamation that I want to read to you.
Yes.
Um, well, I'm not gonna read it because it's not all of it, but but our theological kind of proclamation, our proclamation grounded in a theology that centers our authenticity, not only from a liberation and womanist perspective, but who we are as African people that comes out of a divine kind of imagination,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, Understanding that we are created by divine, right? That we are not mistakes, we are not this, we are not that. We are created by the very hand, thought, breath of God. And in that we have ancestral, we're not just here, we are links in the chain of those whose
That's
DNA
right.
is existent in us.
Yes.
To
Yes.
have that type of understanding, I think, reminds us
Mm-hmm.
that if we start there, that there is one, nothing that we can't do. Number two, um, with that kind of theological foundation and connection that connects us to our creator and our culture, we are beholden ain't the right word. We are compelled, right, to go against anything that takes us away from any human striving, right? I don't care what your position is. I don't care what your platform is. I don't care what your if you're the president, right?
Right.
We we are compelled to engage, and I think that theological foundation and framing is what grounds us for the fight.
And that's so important that you say we have to. Some of us already are walking that out, right? Is that this is what not just what we read and what we believe, but it's our life. It's how
Right.
we live our life, right? It's how we understand ourselves as individuals. It's how I understand myself in community in relationship to you and others and to systems. So I know
That's
when
right.
that system is unjust, and I know that system is designed to dehumanize and debase me. I can see that and recognize that. So I can
Yeah.
resist that will lead me then to be liberated from that system, right? And so
Yeah.
you say that, and I think some of that work has to do, this is a good example. Kevin Roberts, right, that we know is one of the chief architects, right, of Project 2025.
Mhm.
I was listening to in class with Carr, and Greg Carr mentioned his doctoral work. I'm gonna read you his doctoral work, the title of his doctoral work. He did it on Black enslavement, slaves and slavery in Louisiana, the evolution of the Atlantic world identities from 1789 to 1831. Now, what he concluded in his work was that Africans brought here, right, were more apt to be to resist and engage in resistant activity to free themselves and to not be in bondage than those who were born here, who were the ones who were more apt to go and tell the slave master of impending rebellions.
Absolutely.
Right. And so
Absolutely.
what he said was what's best to do is for them to assimilate. Like he understands the power that we
Hmm.
hold and that we have, to your point, right? So it's us understanding and saying, yet instead of running from that, right? Because you do have some who run from, even
Yep.
you call them African, it's going to be a problem. And so
But take it.
identity,
But
right? So
yeah.
so think about what he's doing with Project 2025. Like that scholarship is not lost on him. He knows what he's studying. He knows what has to happen, right?
Hmm.
To dominate, to control, to other, right?
Hmm.
To keep society in this hierarchical way. To your point, pointing back to Eddie Glauber, he talks about the value gap. There's some people more valuable. Like this is all part of it. So
Yeah.
even he
Yeah.
knows for us to tap into that which makes that we already have. It's there. I think
So
it's
take
there.
that a step further.
Yes.
Take that a step further. I mean, cut you off. Take that a step further.
Go ahead.
Because even within our own communities, because we have internalized and been taught um, to be anti who we are, and we've been taught, for instance, that Vodun is,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Santeria is,
Mm-hmm.
all of
Contemplate.
these,
Mm-hmm.
all of these negative types of pieces, which are authentic to us. And watch this, which we practice in some of our expressions of
That's right.
Christianity, Islam, all these other types of pieces, right? But we demonize ourselves because we've been taught. So part of this, and I appreciate how you're doing this. Part of this requires deconstruction for reconstruction,
That's right.
so that we're building toward an authentic acknowledgement and affirmation and understanding of
Mm-hmm.
what's already in us.
Mm-hmm.
It's already in us. It's already in us. It's already in us.
And to
We
that
have no.
point,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
and because I want to, because what you just said, I'm gonna bring up something that was Isaac Hayes the third put on. I think it was either his Instagram or Twitter account, just based on what you're saying. Because also it's part of not just our identity, but understanding the real power that we have, just across the board. We can say culturally, right? We can say in terms of our value systems. I'm talking about going back. I'm talking about back, not
Yeah.
what we've adopted from others that we've allowed.
Yeah.
Other. So this is what he said. He said, "I asked AI what would happen if the entire Black community left Instagram, TikTok, and X. Just left the platform, never came back. That's the question. Here's the impact, the thread that AI gave back. It would have I can't read all of it, but I'll give you the top, like the numbers. Number one, cultural impact, loss of cultural relevance, decline in viral content, reduction in community identity. The second thing it would do, engagement and user activity, drop in daily active users, ripple effect on non-Black users, content homogeneity. Why? Because we got it like that, right? The third one was cultural innovation, stagnation on trends, diminished global influence. Number four, reputation and brand perception, negative public image, media and public scrutiny. Number five, decline in creativity and innovation, less inspiration, weakened algorithms effectiveness. Number six, loss of global conversations, weakened social movements, reduction in cultural exchange. Number seven, platform integrity and identity, erosion of authenticity, community disconnection. Number eight, long-term viability, loss of momentum, risk of irrelevance. That's what AI generated and Black folks left these platforms. So I'm saying to your point, and what I've been saying, and what everyone was saying, we already have the power. Just leaving a platform would make a total shift in those platforms. And what's lost is what I say you can't put a price on.
Yeah.
Right? And then I know Reverend Sharp, I think it was on MSNBC, was saying, okay, so these companies don't want to do DEI, but don't spend your money there. Yeah. Like, we have power. It's just a matter of, can we stay away from, and I'm talking to myself here, and I can, but I'm saying these struggles that you have with places that you like to go, that you don't get, you can't go, right? And so I've always done Target, so Walmart's not a stress for me, but there's a Starbucks, right? But I had to leave Starbucks back. Really, I was falling out with Starbucks when they were doing prison labor, years ago, at least a couple of decades ago. And so, it's, so now it's what Cheryl just mentioned, it's Amazon, it's Walmart, I forgot, I can't remember all the companies, right? But they're dropping. And I'm saying
I saw somebody yesterday say, all right, now who about to give up their Tesla?
Boom.
Thank you.
Boom. You feel me? So I'm saying that and so this is where, and I'm really gonna go here. I ain't gonna stay there long because I said I was gonna resist being petty. Somebody else posted it on Facebook. I was like, I've been wanting to say that because so many people who always, we ain't our ancestors. We be careful. We not them. Well, this your time to shine. Let me see you do it. And then, but the more I hear people say that, back, this is a few years ago, back when this would have been Trayvon Martin time frame when Black Lives Matter movement really emerged, and that's what you started hearing a lot of that. And the more I thought, I was like, you know what? Now I'm like, you know what? You're right. You're not, because I can't see us doing what they did. We can't stay away from the store for 2 days. They stayed off of a bus for 381 days, and guess what? They had gas money, insurance money. Why? Because you had a Georgia Gilmore selling plates, selling food from the club from nowhere, making money to pay for all of that. So I'm saying that we have power, that we can be liberated even in this moment, despite what's happening in the White House, while we still have to resist that, right? But we have sacred memory that tells us that this is possible. But it requires delayed gratification, right? It requires your self-interest not overriding the group self-interest, right? It requires us absolutely doing more, I'm going to say the word, that unity that we must have. So even, let's talk about maroon communities. So you want to talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, so leads right into it, right? So you talked about Montgomery bus boycott for 381 days, right? And you talked about the impact you had. One of the reasons they even came to the table because they was losing money. Because for them, it was all about money.
That's right.
Right. But what you also found was that there was a emergence and convergence, if you will, of when those dollars were shifted, they were shifted to buying cars, so that the cars could be used to, take folks where they needed to be taken. And then watch this, for security, they had folks who didn't have nowhere to sleep to watch the cars at night so they wouldn't be vandalized. Right. So there was this that's a whole nother.
It is.
But
Right.
but with regard to maroon communities, if anyone who knows maroon communities, were folks who decided in the midst of the imperial terrorism to go and create their own communities where they did a number of different things. They did their own education, they did their own defense, they did their own administration of how things would work in that community. Went away to the hill, and when people tried to come get them, they had their own kind of military to defend against all of these different places. But what they did was created community. They farmed, they ate, they raised kids. They did all of this with a certain type of consciousness, right? And so, Danny, when you and I were talking, I'm sorry, Reverend Danny,
You
when you
good.
and I were talking, one of the things we said, even if people can't maroon physically, there's got to be a maroon mentality
Yes.
where we engage in these things for ourselves with our communities, right? And this goes back to something that Dr. Melvin Sampson was talking about. It can't just be pointing out one or two or three folks to do it. This has got to be a communal.
That's right.
I think the way for us to thrive, not just survive,
Thriving.
is through intentional engagement, intentional collective coming together of community. Without Ubuntu, we will not survive, much less thrive. That's gonna be the way we do it,
Right.
and not just for these 4 years, but going beyond, right?
Yes.
And again, we have sacred memory that reminds us of how to do that. I mean, shoot, if you want to go biblically, go to Acts 2, right? Each shared as each had need, and everyone flourished. If we go back to our own communities, when we couldn't live, quote unquote, next to them, right?
Right.
You have a doctor. I mean, there was some maroonage that's some maroonage that's like inherent in us.
That's right.
Right? I think it's calling on that and being intentional about that, I think, is extremely important in this hour, in this moment.
Yeah, and to your point, and to see a maroon community up close, and I had the opportunity to do that.
You've seen it, right?
Yeah,
You
right.
saw it.
So we went to, we were in Bahia in Brazil, Salvador Bahia in Brazil, and we went to one of the Quilombos one day. And of course it's up, you go up because usually to your right, what they did to escape the plantation, they had to go up mountains and go into distant places to set up. And so it's been there forever, right? So just entering to the Colombo, you see the sign, the name, And what struck me was the amount of young people who were there. They sent them all off to university to be educated, and they all returned back to the Quilombo. And so you can see how they modernize even. So we're there just to kind of learn, to sit, to listen. But of course, they didn't sell you palm oil. They sell you what they make on the land. In addition to, clothes, t-shirts, just what they make. I mean, that's how they survive too, right? They maintain control of their own products that they make. They sell it on their own. Even though when we were there, they were telling us that the government was trying to get control over their making and selling of the palm oil.
Of course they were.
Yes,
Of course they were.
and so what they had, because what the government started doing was making the palm oil with all these other additives, where it was not as rich, right? But so far, they've been able to maintain control of that and still sell it in the local markets. And so just see the young people who went off to university, came back, used that knowledge and the skill sets they obtained at university to keep the Colombo, keeping the roots, right? We're not forgetting where we came from, but we also understanding that we have to be able to adapt to the changing of the times, that we might not be, that we can stay here and we can still grow and flourish. And so I thought, so clearly it was, to your point, it was something instilled in the young people, and they see not just necessity, but they see the brilliance of having their own, really leaning into who they are and really serving the God they know. And resisting trying to just be, because I'm sure someone can go off to university and say, well, now I can be proximate to what seems to be some type of power and position, right? But they chose not to do that. Now I think they go back and forth, down into the old city, the new city, but they're clearly, their roots are there. And that was very evident as we, were there, and just seeing how they prepared lunch for you. You could just see the very communal way in which lunch is prepared, how they served you. How they really treat the hospitality, right? And just to see that working in 2023, that this is what was happening back in the 1800s, 1700s, 1800s, right? They would talk about how the land had been passed down for that many years. They had been on that land. Yeah. And it was beautiful land, right? Yeah. It was absolutely beautiful. So to your point, like, it's possible. Even if it's a maroon mindset that still create maroon community, it just looks different. And I think that's what we have to know about what it means to kind of go back and fetch that which is valuable and useful for us to move forward. It didn't have to look that way. We're talking about what undergirds the work is those principles. And the way in which you do the work is what we're talking about, grabbing onto, and how do you make that relevant for today. Yeah. Which is so important. So I think that's part of how we get to the liberation part of things, right? While we're resisting. See, to me, the resistance is boycotting this, boycotting that. The resistance is continuously calling out what is happening and what is being done. But the liberation is, what are we creating? What institutional power are we building? Because that's how it has to happen, right? Individually, we can't beat this system that's at work. So how do we build it? Go ahead.
So to your point, I think the coupling of resistance and liberation is extremely important, because you can't always just be against something. You got to be for something.
Right.
Because if you're just against something and not for something, then you never know what you're being against is being for. Right. So having at the forefront, what is it that I'm for?
Yeah.
And then everything that we do be geared, be focused toward getting to that for. And if that means being against something, if I'm running for a touchdown and there's somebody in my way,
right,
for the touchdown, but I'm gonna run you over because I'm trying to get to the touchdown.
Right.
See what I'm saying? So I think that's an extremely important perspective to have. What are we for?
Right.
What are we for?
And that's what's so important. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get, so what we did last weekend before last, these days merged together. Oh, was this last weekend? Yes, sorry. So on our MLK King teach-in, one of the things that we did, because of course we try to do it where it's not just a day, right? We try to do something where it's ongoing connection, where you continue to grow and learn. And so one of the things we put forth is, it was a combination of 6 other sites that we did the work with. Some of the folks, Willie Francois, Stephen Green, Gray, and some others, right? We put together a value statement, and so we're still working that through and passing that to community to respond to, because we're saying this is what we're for, a list of things that we are for and where we're going to work to flourish in. We have, maternal health, Black maternal health, reproductive rights was one of those, and then the carceral state was one of those, right? So to your point, it's like, yes, we're going to resist Project 2025. Thank you, Cheryl. So Reggie, I don't know if you can see this, but this is kind of can you see this in the camera? Brooke, can you see? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we kind of created this teaching guide, right? And so toward the back, we just had this faithful action, and it was really our statement of values. So it was inclusive democracy, because a lot of times I don't know if particularly Black voices are in that conversation around democracy, particularly a racial democracy that's just 60 years old. So it's still fragile. It's always been fragile, and now it's done teetered, right?
Sometimes we got to question if it's democracy.
I mean, at all. Precisely. So it's about how are our voices in that informing that conversation, right? So then it was economic justice and repair, abolishing the carceral state, uplift Black maternal health and care, which is something, I'm really leaning into, Black maternal care, and also ensure access to education, support immigration justice, because I hear a lot of us also saying, get the illegals out the country, get them out. Again, we're not understanding fully. We're buying into the propaganda and repeating that propaganda. So we also got to talk about that in real ways. And then advancing environmental justice, because we know, particularly here in Dallas, our communities are most susceptible to environmental racism through racist zoning policies. So to your point, so we're saying, here's what we're for, here's what we're going to work, we're working toward this, so we might be liberated. And sometimes that means creating alternative systems, i.e. the maroon communities, maroon mindset, are ways of doing that. But we're also going to call you out on your policies that are poisonous, that are designed to kill, right? And that are designed to ensure that people stay on the bottom while very few stay on the top. So we have to continue to resist that and not just lay down. Because I think we have to keep being that echo chamber, because what cannot happen is people begin to settle into and just learn to adapt to the new way this world is going to be. That's the most dangerous thing that can happen. Well, that's how it is. Let me just kind of adjust to it. Kind of like if something's wrong in your body and you don't go see the doctor, you just kind of compensate for whatever that may be ailing you. Get along. Yes, that's what we cannot have happen. I think we have to continue to have these conversations in multiple spaces. And then I'm also hoping that we can also get on one accord in terms of, in this way, where do we have a common interest where we can say, here are the top 5 things, all of our, particularly our, what I would call storied or long-standing institutions, but also emerging institutions that people are doing the work. How can we come together? And I don't even want to say like a Project 2025, because we don't want to be like, we want our own thing. Call it something. Don't even use the same language. Like I know someone started Black Project 2025. Why are we even using the language? Yeah, that's so, and I'm saying, so how do we, but like Project 20, yes, and I just told y'all, the AI told you without TikTok and everything else, there would be no creativity, innovation, and imagination, right? So we have it. But when you open that book, you can't deny that even if those 100 or so or more think tanks, policy institutes, foundations, et cetera, that are listed in Project 2025, right? At least they knew, here's where we're going, here's our goal. Whether I really was involved in it or not, I'm putting my name on it because I agree with it. So we need to be able to look and see, what are we for? How do we do this to show the power that we have? Because when we're doing it bits and pieces, this person over here, this person, it's a disconnect, right? So I don't know how we get there, if we'll ever get there, but we can at least start moving in that direction, because if we're going to have a maroon mindset, that's what that means.
Well, I think 2 things that are very, very important about what you said. One, we got to plant seeds under whose trees we may never sit.
Right. Yeah.
Number 2, Amos Brown told me and Earl Fisher, we were at Morehouse College. It's got to be 2-3 years ago now. I ain't gonna tell you everything he said, but one thing he said was that, people think that, in every city it was 10% of people who were supporting King. He said it wasn't 10%, it was more like 3%. And with that 3%, turn the world around.
Right.
Right. And so, in addition to what you're saying about us coming together, realizing that everybody ain't gonna come, but if enough of us come,
That's right. That's right.
we can flip some stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and if enough of us come and flip stuff, then others may. But you know, not but
And right.
we have the only way we give up our power is by thinking we have none.
Yes. And to end on, since you brought in that good old word, is also, actually when it says these are they who have come to turn this world upside down, it wasn't thousands who did that, right? Because you're talking about an early movement in terms of Christianity, right? We didn't call it Christianity, but the movement, right? The way was underway.
Was the way.
The way was underway. The revolution was happening. It wasn't tons of people, but if we just get to your point, we just get who's ready.
That's right.
And it can happen. So, as always, the hour moves quickly. We're over an hour, so we held you a little too long. But let's thank Reverend Dr. Reggie Wiliams Jr. for being in the classroom on today.
Thank you for
sharing so
me.
much wealth, knowledge, wisdom.
Honored to be with you.
We appreciate it. And we want you to join us next week. So, like I said, we had January 20th this week. We had January 14th a couple of weeks ago, where the 89th Texas legislative session was called into order. And this is definitely shaping up to be one of the most oppressive sessions that we have had. In that many of the bills that we looked at that were pre-filed are not going to bode well for most Texans and Black Texans, and I would also dare to say our Hispanic Texans as well. A lot of those bills are going to impact us directly. And so we're going to have next week, we're going to talk about, I'm calling the new Western frontier. That we are going to be faced with this 8th legislative session. Is going to be a wild ride. But as I've been telling everyone, I don't care if we don't have the power in the legislature this go around. What we do have is our voice and our fingerprints. Our DNA need to be left on that Capitol to say we did not take it laying down, that we did resist, that we did go down and put our testimony on committee and it's on record that we had something to say about what's happening to us. And so we're going to talk about that next week. We're going to talk about where we are. We're going to talk about the nature of this, the makeup of this legislature, how it's going to go and what we need to be aware of. And we're also asking you, we'll have next week your opportunity to schedule or register to go ahead and get your seat on a bus or drive yourself down to Austin. We're going to have a legislative days Monday, Tuesday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, March 16th through the 18th. We know you probably can't stay all 3 days, but you can pick and choose. If you want to just come down on your own and be a part of what we're doing, we'll also have transportation options for those who want to ride the bus. And we'll have all that information next week. You begin to sign up immediately. Again, I know we have a lot going on, but this is serious. So we're at the point now we have to show up. They have to see that we care about our own flourishing, that we care about our own demise. If we're not there saying something, it's almost like, what was it, Audrey Lloyd? They'll kill you and say you enjoyed it.
You enjoyed it.
So we have to do our part. So we're encouraging you, hey, if you have to sacrifice, don't go somewhere else to come to Austin. We're encouraging you to do so. It's so important that we be present and that we make our presence felt and known, that we resist what is happening and what they plan to do in terms of the bills they are filing. Mm-hmm. And they are intent on even filing more voter suppression bills. If it could get any more oppressive in Texas, I don't know what more can you do? And they're going to find ways to do that. So we need to be prepared and be ready. So thank you, Reverend Dr. Reggie Wiliams. We'll continue the conversation next week about some action and how we might then get engaged and be involved in our current session. And we're going to have to come back and really do something around what it means to reconstruct a maroon mindset among people. So we'll have to come back and do that. We might have to even do a session that we offer. So we're going to talk about that because I think that's something we have to do in order to get us to really begin to have at least a worldview that we can share. We're not going to agree on everything, right, but we got some things that bind us together. right? And the way in which we're going to be. So thank you so much for being here on today. And of course, you can help support Fannie's Classroom by purchasing a t-shirt. It's on the screen there. Brooke has that up for you. You can scan it if you're not on your phone. You can also go to friendshipwest.org/justice, and you can purchase your t-shirt from the website as well. We look forward to seeing you on next week. Thank you for being with us. We'll see you next week right here in the classroom at 12 noon.
From the church house.